Good evening, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News. We are discussing rules governing waste management in Trinidad and Tobago. To do that, the Assistant Manager, Technical Services, Environmental Management Authority, Jiselle Joseph, she joins us. It is time for In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Hello, Ms. Joseph. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for welcoming me and inviting me to this interview.
Our pleasure. I want to start off getting an idea from you. What exactly are the waste management rules?
Well, the waste management rules, the objective is to regulate environmentally sound management of all wastes. And to do this, what we did was we set out a permitting system for persons who generate waste as well as those who handle waste. So the rules set out the requirements for persons for applying for and obtaining a permit under the legislation to continue operations, or if they intend to generate or handle waste, they also are required to apply for that permit. What we wanted to do was to incentivize specific practices to encourage waste minimization, prevention, and other activities that will only serve to help with the management of waste in the country. We also wanted to help reduce the incidence of illegal or indiscriminate dumping by mandating specific activities, practices, and requirements, including a manifest system to track waste when it's moved from the generator to its ultimate destination for disposal. So those are the key items, objectives that are included in the waste management rules. And of course, we can go into more details and specifics on the requirements so persons can get a better idea, understand what is required of them.
All right, so there are a few things you spoke about in terms of the fact that it's a punitive system, the fact that in that system you also have incentives, so we want to talk about each of those separately. But in terms of signing up for it, who is the person or persons or the group of individuals that this directly targets?
Okay, so we in particular are targeting generators and handlers in the environmental, the industrial, and the commercial sector. So if you operate a business that generates waste at or above the quantities that are specified in the rules, and in the rules, there's a schedule 1, that lists the regulated quantities for the various types and categories of waste. Once you generate waste for any one of these wastes at the regulated quantities, you are required to apply for and obtain that permit. In terms of persons who handle waste, now handling refers to processing, treatment, packaging, collection, disposal, recovery, reuse, recycling, or any of the other activities that are related to waste management. You are also required to apply for and obtain a permit. For persons who generate hazardous waste, it should be noted that hazardous waste is regulated in any quantity. So it doesn't matter the quantity of hazardous waste that you generate, you must apply for and obtain a permit. Similarly, it doesn't matter the quantity of waste, hazardous waste that you handle, you are required to apply for and obtain a permit. And in order to determine whether or not you actually generate or you handle hazardous waste, Schedule 2 in the rules actually lists the characteristics that are used to determine what is hazardous. So there's 2 tables. One table lists the parameters at concentrations at which your waste will be deemed hazardous. And then the other lists the characteristics such as if it's explosive, it's corrosive, flammable, those types of characteristics. There's a suite of characteristics that are included, and the EMA uses those definitions to determine whether you handle hazardous waste.
Now, there's a saying that ignorance of the law doesn't forgive you for when you break the law. Where do individuals find this system? Is it online? How can people access it?
Yes. Yes, so currently we have the information, the rules itself is included on our website. So persons are free to go on our website and pull up the legislation. There are the waste management rules and the waste management fees regulation. The waste management rules lists the requirements and obligations of persons who fall under the remit of the rules. It includes information regarding as well in not just the permitting system, but it outlines the requirement for the waste manifest that I mentioned before, including the specific items that must be included in the manifest. And that manifest is important for tracking the movement of waste. That is really the measure that we're going to use to minimize any incidents of, illegal dumping, etc. It also specifies the requirements for a policy of insurance. So the policy of insurance really is to treat with any liabilities for incidents or other emergencies that may occur at the facility with relation to the operation. So if there's a spill or unintended release to the environment based on the operations, the policy of insurance is intended to cover that. It also includes exemptions. So I should point out that not everybody will be required who generates or handles waste will be required to apply. So under Rule 47, there's several activities and premises that are listed as being exempt. And some of them include, well, the major one being households. We don't intend to regulate every household under the requirements of the rules because it would be a bit onerous, especially where the waste manifest system is concerned and the permitting system is concerned. So households are exempt, places of worship, primary and secondary schools, agricultural farms, vessels, aircrafts, the child rehabilitation centers, child care centers, etc. Those are some of the activities that are listed as being exempt. Of course, generation of air pollutants are covered under the air pollution rules, so it's not regulated under the waste rules. And discharge of wastewater is regulated under the water pollution rules, so it's not regulated under the rules.
And let me choke some fire and be devil's advocate now, Ms. Joseph. In terms of some of those people who are under the exemption, is there any manner or any potential for them to be producing something like hazardous waste, even if it's in minute amounts? Right. How do we look at that?
So that is where, I'm glad you brought that up because, for example, a household, we don't expect that persons who solely and wholly reside on their residence are generating hazardous waste in quantities that need to be regulated. And we also want to note that the waste management under these, for these particular activities may be managed under other entities. There may be other pieces of legislation in train that may be designed to address that. But if you are at your residence conducting a business per se that generates waste at or above the quantity specified in the rules, you will be required to apply for and obtain a permit. So it doesn't mean because you're operating in your house, you're exempt. No, the households that are exempt are those that are only used as a residence for persons. Other than that, if you conduct a business at your house, you will be required to apply for and obtain a permit once the waste is being generated or being handled according to the requirements of the rules.
And that is specifically why I asked, thinking of cottage industries, thinking of individuals
Yes.
who have been forced to pivot during the COVID pandemic, so they have started boutique businesses in their places of residence. But one of the things we spoke about, and I want you to double back on that a little bit, please, specific punitive measures. What are some of those? And I guess on the other side of the break, we'll start to talk about incentives.
Okay, so in terms of punitive measures, we don't really, I don't want to call it punitive, but the fees themselves are intended to help encourage the different generators and handlers of waste to adopt specific practices. The fees were designed along the lines of the polluter pays principle. So essentially, the more that you generate, the more that you handle, the higher the fees that you have to pay. And this is, towards the objective of promoting more sustainable consumption practices and production practices, so that you're now encouraged, because you want to reduce the fees that you have to pay, to implement measures within your facility to help reduce the amount of waste that you have to dispose of. So implementing reuse activities, ways in which you can reintroduce the item back into your process, whatever you can do to extend that life cycle of your commodity without having to dispose of it or discard of it immediately. That is what we're trying to encourage. So the fees themselves, what we are using, not as a punitive measure, but to basically, compel the different generators and handlers in commercial and the industrial sector to move towards that circular model, that circular economy, where everything is reused as much as possible and you extend the lifetime of the commodity. And in terms of non-compliance, well, the non-compliance is treated with as outlined in our Environmental Management Act, as it is for all the other pieces of legislation. So we will monitor for compliance with the requirements in the permits that we issue. And if there is any breach detected, we have a system in place that we follow in accordance with the Environmental Management Act with respect to enforcement. So, we try as much as possible to work with the applicants, the permit holders, but, where necessary, we will take enforcement action.
And I appreciate you, Ms. Joseph. It makes me feel now that there are incentives and then there are stern suggestions. But we're going to talk about some of the incentives when we return. Stay with us. We are speaking with Jiselle Joseph, Assistant Manager Technical Services of the EMA. We come back with more. Welcome back to In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. We are discussing waste management rules and regulations with the Assistant Manager Technical Services of the Environmental Management Authority, Jiselle Joseph. On the other side of the break, Ms. Joseph, we spoke about stern suggestions. Now, how is it that the EMA incentivizes individuals, both generators and handlers, to make less waste and treat with it a little more responsibly?
Well, it's essentially built into the requirements. So if we look at the registrable quantities, the regulated quantities listed, and a company would be encouraged, if they do not want to fall within the permitting regime, to look at ways in which they can modify their processes, modify their operations, so that the waste that they generate does not fall within the categories as the quantities as stipulated. If you can do that, then you do not need to apply for a permit, because remember, the quantities are specified in the rules. And in so doing, you not only save yourself the amount of money that you would have to pay, because the fees that you have to pay are not just at the application stage, but you also have to pay annual fees. And those annual fees are related directly to the quantity of waste that you generate. So if it is you do not want to pay the fees, then it would be in your best interest to really examine how you currently operate, what you can do to recycle as much as possible. And we also will be including measures in the permits themselves, so conditions that will speak to specific practices that we want to see, as well as encouraging specific adoption of measures that will help them. Not only, it's not only a benefit to the environment, but a benefit for them as well, from a financial perspective. So, it's really, encouraging the behavior by showing them, okay, this is the things that you will need to do if you want to continue in the current way that you're continuing. But if it is, you want to be able to, not have to be, fall under the regime that is being stipulated, then it is in your best interest to really, examine how you can change the way that you do business, how you can change your process. And the benefits are not, as I see, not just to the environment, but to you financially in the long run.
Now, you said that generators are required to engage in activities to reduce waste generation. That's kind of built into the system. And also they're required to engage in environmentally friendly practices. Can you itemize some of those practices? What are some of the things that individuals have said, okay, well, these are some of the things that I'm going to do to follow this system or these guidelines?
Right. So as I said, we want to encourage ways and means in which you can minimize. So the hierarchy they start with is prevention, where you can prevent the production of the waste as part of your activities. But we recognize it will take time, and that's why there's a permitting regime. A permit is valid for 3 years, and it gives you the conditions under which you can operate as you work towards these measures and implementing these measures to reduce your waste. So in terms of the conditions included will speak to environmentally sound management. So in terms of segregation, in terms of how to properly manage the waste, how to store, how to treat with in terms of packaging for disposal, packaging for transport, labeling requirements, all of the things that you will need to take into consideration in terms of your operations. These are the kinds of things that we will be including in the permits. Measures that will ensure that the waste does not have impacts to the environment. So the prevention measures to prevent any spills, unnecessary spills into the environment. So it's really looking holistically at the operations and in terms of the generation of waste or the handling of waste, and including conditions to help them manage and properly implement the activity with minimal impact to the environment.
And one of the things that I can see being part and parcel of it as well is making sure that you don't have quote-unquote normal waste getting into contact with hazardous waste, because that also gives the opportunity for everything to become hazardous. But
yes,
diversification is a word that is being used around the place at this point in time. Waste management and SDGs, how do they play into each other?
Well, actually, the waste management rules help to fulfill one of the SDG goals, which is Goal 12. And Goal 12 speaks to prioritizing sustainable practices for sustainable consumption and sustainable production. So the objectives of Sustainable Development Goal 12 and Sustainable Development Goal 12 and a lot of the other Sustainable Development Goals are linked to the National Environmental Policy, which we also ascribe to, and the rules also helps to fulfill in terms of the actions that are included. Those Sustainable Development Goals, the rules will, play its role to help achieve. Again, through the measures included, we hope to get people to start thinking about the circular model, as I said, moving towards that circular economy, where wherever you can extend the life, the useful life of a product or commodity, and reduce the need to actually discard. We want to move away from use and discard models and trying to find ways to reuse and recycle as much as possible the different wastes that we generate, or what we consider waste, because sometimes what we consider waste may be a useful input to another process. So that's really the objectives of the rules, and how the rules will help to move the government in terms of moving towards achieving its objectives with respect to sustainable development.
And when you say that, that really makes me think of the saying that one man's trash is another man's treasure. But we really want to thank you for giving that input and letting us know where we can find these rules on the Environmental Management Authority's website. So we want to thank you once again, Jiselle Joseph, Assistant Manager, Technical Services of the Environmental Management Authority. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. Thank you for joining us.